and open the weight room. I'm going to go ahead and mute everyone, and Matt, if you can unmute yourself when you're ready, and everyone. Good evening, everybody. Muy buenas noches. Good evening, everyone. We're going to get started in just a moment. En un par de momentos vamos a comenzar. We'll get started in just a moment. Okay, thank you for everybody for joining us. This is December 22nd, and this workshop is about DACA initial applications, eligibility, evidence, and legal updates, December 22nd, 2020. My name is Kate Hinnenkamp. I am the interim program director at the Community Board Project. And we're going to get started, but we're going to explain a few things first. So, muy buenas noches. Vamos a introducciones y explicar un par de cosas, pero quiero empezar con hablar de la interpretación. So, Matt, would you advance to that slide, please? Ok, so hoy tenemos interpretación disponible y la presentación va a ser en inglés, pero todo va a estar traducido al español. Entonces, si están en una computadora, pueden localizar el icono de interpretación. Es el mundo que está en la parte de abajo de su pantalla a mano derecha. Van a clicar el mundo. Go back, Matt, please. Y van a clicar el mundo y van a elegir Spanish o español. Ok, eso es en la computadora. All right, next slide. Si están en un teléfono o una tableta o un iPad, van a localizar arriba donde están los tres puntos o, los tres puntitos y van a elegir More y van a elegir Language Interpretation. Entonces, los tres puntos donde dice More y van a elegir Language Interpretation. And I think there's something on the next slide, maybe. No, I guess not. So, cuando escogen Language Interpretation, van a elegir el español. También tenemos la función de chat. So, para el chat, van a localizar el botón con los tres.
Ok, está bien, muchas gracias.
I'm going to go ahead. Si todos se pueden poner en mudo, por favor, si no están haciendo una pregunta. Y, ok, so pueden poner comentarios en el chat. Más adelante también va a haber oportunidad para hacer preguntas en voz alta, pero pueden poner sus preguntas en el chat y vamos a ir contestando. So thank you everyone for joining us. I was just explaining the interpretation. The main presentation will be in English this evening, but we do have Spanish translation available, and there is an interpretation button on the bottom of your screen if you prefer the presentation in Spanish. And again, my name is Kate Hinnenkamp. I'm the interim program director at the Community Action Board Immigration Project, and I'd like to introduce my colleague, Lily Sturgis. She'll introduce herself.
Good evening, everyone. I'm one of the attorneys at the Santa Cruz County Immigration Project, which is a program of the Community Action Board, and I will be on hand to answer questions via chat, and you can do it either in English or in Spanish.
And I believe that my colleague Isai Ambrosio is with us.
Hello, everybody. My name is Isai, and I'm the program director for the Davenport Resource Center. I'm happy to see you all.
And Matt, if you want to introduce yourself.
Absolutely. Good evening, everyone, and thanks for joining us. My name is Matthew Weisner, and I'm the directing attorney at the Santa Cruz County Immigration Project at the Community Action Board. And I will be leading on the presentation today.
So we wanted to start off by just telling you a little bit about our agency. So the Community Action Board, our mission is to partner with the community to eliminate poverty and create social change through advocacy and essential services. And we have 6 different programs, including homelessness prevention and housing programs, employment and reentry services, immigration legal services, community building and youth development, and then our program, which is the Immigration Project. And our main offices are in Watsonville. Right now, during the pandemic, all of our services are by telephone, but our main office is in Watsonville. You can see there our phone number, and we have a special email set up for questions about first-time DACA applications. If you just need to renew your DACA, you can call us. But we go back to that slide one sec, Matt. But if you're calling for if you want to start an application for DACA for the first time, it's that daca@cabinc.org email, and we'll share that again later. And with that, I'm going to hand it over to Matt to tell you what you're here for, which is more about DACA. And thanks for your questions in the chat. We will be addressing those as we go, and then for sure at the end.
Thanks, Kate. And before we get into the meat of the conversation, you see on your screen an image of our office there in downtown Watsonville. As Kate mentioned, unfortunately, right now, we are not doing in-person service, but we continue our work remotely and through electronic and telephone means. So if you have questions, we will list our phone number and other contact information throughout this presentation tonight. So the Santa Cruz Immigration Project provides various legal services related to immigration. You can see on your screen that we provide green card renewals, applications for permanent residents, petitions for family members, and many other services, of which DACA is just one. And tonight, our presentation will be focused on DACA initial applications. This is a developing area based on some recent news and legal changes. So we're going to spend the bulk of the presentation speaking about that tonight. So as many of you may have heard, within the last several months, there have been a series of court decisions in the United States that have affected the DACA program and eligibility to apply for this protection. Most recently, the Supreme Court had determined that the Department of Homeland Security had unlawfully tried to terminate the DACA program, and a federal judge in December on the 4th ordered that the department restore the original DACA program and continue to allow new initial applications. And this would mark the first time in the past 3 years that new applicants would be welcome to submit applications with immigration. Today is also a day in which we had more legal developments, and this is an ongoing process, but I do want to flag this before we continue with our conversation. Today in Texas, a federal judge named Andrew Hanen heard arguments from 9 attorneys general of different states who are trying to get the DACA program terminated. Their arguments are that the Obama administration unlawfully extended this protection to DACA beneficiaries. Unfortunately, we are still having this conversation, and this is still an ongoing legal battle. We don't have a decision yet. There were 3.5 hours of oral arguments today. We expect a ruling within weeks or months. And I do want to emphasize that that won't be the end of the conversation. So whatever this judge does would be subject to appeal by either side. So please stay tuned and continue to monitor the legal developments and ask any lawyer or other licensed immigration expert if you have questions about any developments in the law in the coming months. So what does this all mean? The DACA program has been restored to its original form before 2017, before the Trump administration tried to terminate it. That means that undocumented youth who want to submit a first-time application are welcome to do so. That work permits will be issued for 2 years, again, instead of 1 year. And that anybody who had previously applied for a work permit and had received a 1-year work authorization will be automatically reissued a 2-year work permit. It also means that DACA beneficiaries will be able to apply for advanced parole under the original rules. And advanced parole is a permission to travel internationally. So these are all really positive developments for young people and undocumented folks who are interested in applying and eligible to apply for this protection. So today, the bulk of the conversation is going to be about DACA eligibility and how to prove eligibility for individuals interested in applying for the very first time. And on your screen, I know there's a lot of words here, but we'll go through this all together piece by piece. There are 7 basic requirements, and then we tacked on at the end, number 8 is you have to be at least 15 years old in order to apply for this protection. So to summarize the basics, in order to be eligible for work authorization and protection from deportation under the DACA program, the basic requirements are that you were born after June 15th, 1981. Number 2, that you came to the United States before turning 16 years old. That's the childhood arrivals part of deferred action for childhood arrivals. Next, number 3, you have to have continuously lived in the United States since that time. So you can't have gone back and lived in another country and returned to the United States since 2007. So the continuous presence is one of the central tenets of this program. Number 4, you'll need to demonstrate that you're actually living in the United States when the program was announced. And that was announced originally on June 15th, 2012 by the Obama administration. Number 5, you'll have to demonstrate that at that time when the program was announced, you did not have other lawful status, which could include things like a student visa, tourist visa, lawful permanent residence, or other permission to reside in the United States. The 6th eligibility requirement for DACA is that an applicant must be in school seeking a high school diploma or have already attained a GED, a general education certificate, or have been discharged honorably from the armed services. So to be clear, you only need one of those 3. Either be in school, have a diploma, a GED, or the 4th would be the armed services honorable discharge. So you don't need all of them, just one. The next requirement is that an applicant has a clean criminal history. So no felonies or significant misdemeanors on their record and no more than 2 other misdemeanors. And we'll talk a little bit more about what that means. But basically, crimes like DUIs, unfortunately, are considered significant misdemeanors. So many youth may not be eligible depending on criminal history. And finally, to apply for this work permit and protection from removal, an applicant has to be at least 15 years old at the time of application. So I'm going to go on to the Spanish screen. This is just a translation of what we talked about for folks who are reading along. Now I'd like to go through a hypothetical to illustrate the eligibility requirements. And this is an opportunity for us to all practice and to understand who is able to get DACA and who is not. So we're going to go through Hector's hypothetical. And Hector is a 20-year-old Mexican citizen who was born on April 1st, 2000, on April Fool's Day. Hector entered the United States with his family on foot without any lawful status. They did not have any visa. And he was only 7 years old at the time. So that would be in about May 2007. Hector's lived continuously in the United States without leaving. And although he didn't finish high school, he does have a job working as an office assistant. And Hector doesn't have any criminal history except for a speeding ticket in 2019. So I'm hoping what you can all do is write down what you think, and we'll open up a poll here, and you can record whether you think Hector would be eligible for DACA or not. So Kate, if you want to start the poll, we can do that. So while she's working on it, I want you all to think about the eligibility, and I'm going to go back to the slide. These eligibility requirements on the screen, this is your cheat sheet. And you can consider whether you think Hector is eligible or not. So you can first mark which eligibility requirements does he meet. And you can check all that apply.
Matt, you can see the poll, right?
Yes. Thanks, Kate.
And you can, if the poll is blocking your screen, you can slide it off to the side so you can read Hector's story while you're doing the poll.
So for example, was Hector born after June 15th, 1981? When did he come to the United States? We can think about criminal history. And you'll see when you scroll down below, we're also asking you whether Hector is eligible to apply for DACA. So I'll give folks another minute to read through this. Okay, so okay, I think we can go ahead and close the poll and see the results.
There's still people responding. Give it a couple more seconds.
Yeah, we'll give everybody another minute.
You have to answer both of the questions before you can hit submit. I'm going to go ahead and end the polling and share the results.
All right. So it looks like most people identified some of the critical eligibility requirements, right? Hector was born within the range that qualifies. He came before his 16th birthday. He was only 7 years old. He's lived continuously, so 83% of people got that. He was physically present in the United States. He had no lawful status on June 15th, 2012. He entered undocumented, and the hypothetical didn't give us any other information about his immigration status. And everybody, it looks like 83%, so only 17% misidentified this one, but he does not yet have his high school diploma. So I'm happy to see that many of you are thinking about education. That's one of the only requirements that can be remedied. Unless you're under 15, none of the other requirements can be fixed except for the educational requirement. So unfortunately, DACA is a benefit that is very strict with eligibility. Either you qualify under these rules or not. But we will talk about if you think you may qualify, how can you demonstrate that to immigration in order to prove that you should receive a work authorization card and protection from removal. So in order to qualify.
Oh, sorry, yeah. Matt, what is the correct answer for question number 2? I don't know that that's clear to people.
Yeah, the correct answer for question number 2 is that Hector did not qualify for DACA unless he goes back to get his diploma or GED. Because as you can see in the example on your screen, he did not finish high school. And even though he's working and is doing really well, you know, he doesn't have any criminal history, he meets all the other requirements. That is one of the essential qualifications to get DACA. So Hector could go back to get a GED program. And as long as he's enrolled in pursuing that, he may apply for DACA. So let's talk a little bit about how do we show all these things, right? There's many eligibility requirements and they're asking for evidence. It is the applicant's burden. It's their responsibility to prove that they're eligible for the government to issue a work permit and protection from deportation. DACA is different from some other immigration benefits and laws because DACA is discretionary, which means that the officer who reviews the case can decide whether the person deserves it or not. And that means it's our job to prove that the applicant is worthy of the benefit, but also meets all of the qualifications. And that can be difficult, right? So we do submit evidence for all of those requirements to show eligibility. If someone doesn't submit evidence, their case may be denied, or they could receive a request for more information, for more evidence from an immigration officer. So we do strongly suggest that any applicant prepare their case with an experienced and licensed attorney or accredited representative who can help collect that information. So let's start with proof of identity. This is one of the crucial pieces of evidence we have to submit to immigration. Your identity can be proven using a birth certificate with any other photo ID, like a school ID, or with a passport from any country in the world. You will want to make sure a passport is valid since those expire, just like driver's licenses and other identity documents sometimes do. You want to make sure that any identity document you use is not expired. Other options to prove identity are a California state ID, a driver's license, whether it has the mark or not on it that says this is not for federal purposes. These are identity documents that carry a photograph, and that is one of the requirements. On the next slide here, you'll see examples of different ways to prove that you entered before turning 16 years old. And these are only examples. You don't have to stress out about getting all of this information together. These are to help you think about what evidence do I have in my life that might be sitting in my closet or in my files that I might be able to request, right? In order to demonstrate what age I was when I entered the United States. So for a lot of folks, if they entered very young, it could be something like school records, like baptismal records, or even vaccinations. For others, it might be in pay stubs or employment records, right? So it depends on where you were when you were 15, 14 years old. If you were in the United States, what records might exist. I think for many applicants, they look to school records from the K-12 system. And we'll talk a little bit about how to request those in a moment. So next, we're going to need to demonstrate that we meet the educational requirements. And like I mentioned earlier, it's just one of these. It's not all of these. So an official record, like a diploma, would work. GED certificate would work. What's not on the screen, but what we mentioned earlier, is a proof of honorable discharge from the military, or a transcript or other record from the school district showing that the student is currently enrolled. For those who may be eligible but have not yet completed that requirement, there are GED classes in Santa Cruz County. We have the flyer up on the screen there. And we encourage you to reach out and register if you're interested in applying for DACA, but for this, this barrier that you have, it's one that can be remedied. So please take a screenshot or record this information. We can put it in the chat box if you have questions later.
Matt, can I forgot at the beginning to remind people about sharing personal information in the chat. We recommend, for your own confidentiality, if you have individual questions about your case, if you can please send us an email, and I'll put the email in the chat, or Lily, if you could put the email, just the DACA@cabank.org. You can send your questions via email, or you can call our office. We don't recommend putting personal information about, when you came to the country, what your date of birth is, that kind of thing in the chat. but we will definitely get that information from you later and talk to you about your individual case.
I also,
Thanks for bringing that up, Kate.
Sorry, if I could just jump in too for just a second. I just want to remind everybody that although we are attorneys and we are providing this information, any information that we're giving you during this talk and then also what we're answering in the chat box is not necessarily legal advice. That generally would happen face-to-face in a confidential meeting space. So when we're giving information here, it's general for everybody, but it's not. You shouldn't take it as legal advice. You should come in and get your own eligibility screening done.
Both excellent points. Yeah, particularly with respect to what Lily's saying, we will have towards the end of the presentation information about what to do next, right? Next steps and referrals. And we are hoping to link everybody up if they're looking for services with a licensed provider who can look at your case individually. So that next requirement is to prove that you were present when in the United States when Obama announced the policy on June 15th, 2012. And many people tell me, I don't have a record from one day in my past. How could I ever find something from that specific date? Don't panic. That's a normal question, and the law does ask for us to prove presence on that specific date. But anything from the month of June, or alternatively, from the month of May and July, could be enough to show that you were here on June 15th, 2012. So it doesn't have to be specific to that one day. It could come a little bit before or a little bit after, but you want to try to get as close as you can to that date to demonstrate that you were residing here when the policy was announced. So how could you show that? Rent receipts, utility bills, right? Employment records. You might start to see a pattern. Anything that has your name on it and has a date and shows presence in the United States could work as evidence here. So these are just examples to help you brainstorm and think about your own life. Where were you in 2012? Were you working? Were you studying? Were you raising a child at home? Sometimes new moms use the birth certificate or the medical records of the child, which have the mom's name on them. So there are different ways to procure this evidence, and we ask that you think outside the box, which we try to do as legal providers, to do your best to collect it. So this is going to be the most challenging for many people. This is where we prove that you are continuously present in the United States, residing since June 15th, 2007 to the present day. When this policy was announced in 2012, that was about 5 years of records. Now we're in 2020 and it's 13 years of records. So a DACA initial application does not look the same as it did in 2012. It's now much more difficult and much bigger. So what my suggestion would be, again, is to think about where you were in 2007 and what you've done since then, and try to find institutional records that are reliable, that have a name and a date, where you can do a big chunk of time. So if you were in school, get your school attendance records for all the years between 2007 and 2020. If you were paying for a phone bill, get all of your phone bills from that period. Did you have a bank account since 2007? Get your bank records for the whole period. It'll make your life easier, and it'll make the job of whoever assists you in your case easier to do those big blocks of time with a few institutional records. And you'll see on your screen, there's a lot of other options out there. Maybe you go to the dentist every 6 months and you can show, going back 13 years, you've had the same dentist. That's helpful. As we'll see in a moment though, we do want to provide documentation that's continuous, not just a few records, but as you'll see on the screen with this bullet point, we want to show, if not every month, at least one document for every quarter, every 3 months, going back to 2007. So using an example, what that might mean is I could use my dental records from January through January and June, and my school records in the fall, and then maybe some other record in May, right? So you have at least 3 or 4 data points throughout the course of a year to show that you've been present. I would suggest that everybody aim high to try to get 1 record per every month since 2007, if you can. Especially monthly bills or insurance are some of the best ways to do this because you do it every month. So that's where I would start thinking about evidence collection. And as I mentioned earlier, all of this has to have your name, and it has to have the date, and it has to be related to the United States. If it's a receipt, but it doesn't say where the receipt came from because there's no address on it, that might not be very helpful. Sorry, did we lose screen share?
Yes, I'm sorry, Matt, that was me. I think I can give it, yeah, I'll work on it. I was trying to fix a little glitch that was happening.
Yeah, that's okay. We'll continue on, and if we can get that back, we'll return the screen share. So it should show that you're present in the United States in addition to having your name and date. So people think just showing you have a bank account is enough, but it's not. Sometimes you could open a Bank of America account, but live abroad in Mexico or another country. But if you show bank records with ATM withdrawals, right, or check deposits monthly, that shows continuous residence. So please keep in mind those 3 requirements: your name, the date, and that it has to be related to the United States.
You should be able to share your screen again.
Great. Let's see if I can get that back up. We'll continue on. All right, is the PowerPoint up there?
Yes.
Okay. So next, if you had any lawful status in the past, if you ever had a visa, if you entered lawfully as either a permanent resident but lost it, if you entered as a tourist or a student or some other non-immigrant visa, you'll need to demonstrate that in 2012, at the time of the announcement, that status was no longer valid. The rationale there was that they didn't want someone who was lawfully present to let their visa expire and stay in the United States. So this DACA program is only viable for those who were undocumented at the time of the announcement on June 15th, 2012. And if you were undocumented, you may not have any immigration records, in which case you may not have evidence to show a visa that was expired, and that's okay here. So next we'll take a look at if you're eligible and you've been screened by a licensed immigration attorney or accredited DOJ accredited representative, what might you do next? Document collection is the hardest part of these cases. So we do recommend people start on that as soon as possible. If you don't have a file folder at home where you're getting organized, you can start on that this weekend over the holidays. Saving up money. Unfortunately, immigration does charge a $495 fee to apply for deferred action and receive an employment authorization document. That fee is not forgivable or waivable. It is required for every applicant every 2 years. So if money is an issue, there are resources out there. Your local credit union, there are foundations and banks that may provide funds, including the Mission Asset Foundation. The Santa Cruz County Immigration Project is partnering with some of our other programs, the Thriving Immigrants Collaborative, to help raise funds for DACA applicants. So there may be assistance out in the community. And if you need more information about funding assistance, please do send us an email and we can talk about that. I don't know that how far those programs will go in terms of serving the community need for DACA. application fees, but it's worth looking into if money is a hardship for you. Our program is serving the DACA community in initial applications starting in January. We've had to make some staffing shifts and shift resources around and add to our team in order to meet this need. So we will be giving priority to Cabrillo students, faculty, and staff through our partnership with Cabrillo College. But we do hope to be able to serve our growing waitlist in the new year. And we encourage you, if you're interested, to let us know, and you can put your information down on our waitlist. Please also check back for social media updates. The Community Action Board has Facebook accounts and other social media. You might find helpful information through us or through other credible sources if you have questions about legal updates and other questions related to DACA. I do want to mention as well that we have on our screen here and on the next page referrals for other nonprofit organizations that provide immigration legal services, as well as private attorneys on the next page. For those who may be on a wait list but want to see if they can move forward more quickly, I do encourage you to call around. Some nonprofits are very impacted by this announcement. We're receiving hundreds of calls, and we'll be doing our best to serve the need. For some folks, it is time sensitive. Maybe you want to apply sooner and you don't want to wait on a wait list for months. And we do encourage you to exercise your resources and call around and see if you might be able to get your application prepared sooner. So if you'd like to screenshot this, you can save all these phone numbers at once. You can do that on your phone or on your computer, or write them down, whatever's easier. These are nonprofit organizations, and I will move on to the next page in a moment where you'll see private attorneys that are in our local area, Santa Cruz, Santa Clara, and Monterey counties. And these private attorneys are licensed. I do want to mention that this is not an endorsement of anyone's work. We don't make guarantees about the services you would receive by any of these nonprofit organizations besides our own, or by the private attorney. Just know that these are providers in the community who are doing the work. And we want to make sure that you all have as much information as possible when you're making your decisions. So if there's more questions, we can come back to these slides. And here is our phone number. If you'd like to call to be added to the wait list, you can also email us at daca@cabinc.org, which we will put in the chat box for you if it's not already there. You can feel free to email us as well if you have questions or want to be added to the wait list for DACA initial services. So with that, we can open it up to frequently asked questions from the chat or return to issues that we might need more time on.
So Matt, one question that's come up in a couple of different forms is, what happens if I meet all of the requirements, but maybe one or two? So let's say I have everything except for I don't have a GED, or I came in after 2007. What happens if I'm missing one or more requirements?
That's a great question. So like we talked about, education is the only requirement that can be fixed or remedied. If you came in after 2007, unfortunately, the eligibility requirements are very strict. If you did not continuously reside in the United States, or if you were over 31 years old at the time of announcement, which is the 1981 date that we talked about earlier, those are rigid and unmovable requirements at this time. So unfortunately, that means you would not be eligible to apply for DACA. We do encourage you anyway to get confirmation if you have doubts or questions. And the other thing to remember is that the burden is on the applicant to prove these things. You might remember that in Hector's example, he came into the United States when he was 7, but that was in May 2007, which means it was only 1 month before this program was announced. So if we're thinking about it, he has to prove that he was here in May. And that may be difficult for a 7-year-old who maybe wasn't enrolled in school until the fall. So we want to keep these things in mind when we're thinking about our own cases, which is how can I document and meet all the requirements? Even if you know you came in May, it won't help you unless you can prove that you came in May. So unfortunately, we have seen some people struggle with that when it's really close on the dates. So I encourage you to exercise your resources and ask for help in the community. Ask your bank, ask your school for the records, and see if you can do a little private investigative work.
So just to recap, what you're saying is I have to meet all of the requirements, right?
That's correct.
Okay. And one question that has come up a few times is about advanced parole or the travel permit. How can people go about applying for that?
That's also an excellent question. And unfortunately, we didn't have a lot of time for advanced parole in this presentation, but I think it's a good moment to talk about it now. So when we say advanced parole, that's just a legal term for international travel permit. It means it allows you to re-enter the country after exiting for one of 3 qualifying purposes. For a DACA recipient to ask for a travel permit, there's 3 reasons that they can be permitted to return. For travel for humanitarian purposes, which might be for a sick relative or a funeral or another relatively urgent family reason. Or it could be for educational purposes. That's the second of the 3. So that might be an educational program abroad, summer school or something like that. Or the third could be for an employment or professional reason. So I had a client who went abroad to teach tennis lessons for 6 weeks, and that was a professional related travel. So we should think critically about who do we know abroad? What could we do abroad? If you get admitted to an educational program for a short period of time or have a professional opportunity, that may be enough to ask the government for a travel permit. Now, those travel permits are not free. They're only for DACA beneficiaries who have current status that's valid. And they do cost, I believe it's $575, and Lily will help correct me if I'm wrong. It's approximately $570.
I think it's
right?
$595. It's very close.
$590.
I think so.
It's in the high 500s.
High 500s.
We'll look it up together. And that is costly. And again, that's not waivable. So that fee is fixed. And when you apply, you would give the immigration services a date range that you're requesting for travel and provide evidence of the reason for your travel. And we often see DACA beneficiaries, at least prior to the Trump administration's attempt to end the program, we routinely saw these approved. And that international travel actually has an extra benefit. When you re-enter the United States with parole or permission after your travel, that has sort of secondary immigration benefits, right? So for a lot of undocumented youth, they may have come to the United States and entered unlawfully the first time. And so if they can remedy that unlawful entry by entering with permission, there are often benefits to that, particularly for those with adult sons or daughters or spouses who are US citizens. So I do recommend for those who travel with advanced parole or who are interested in traveling, that they consider those potential secondary benefits. And the one last thing I'll mention, and Lily can add any if you have additional points about this, is please think before you travel if you have any issues that might be problematic, right? Do you have any warrants outstanding? Do you have a criminal history that the immigration might not know about yet that could come up later? Have you been previously deported or ordered deported by an immigration judge or at the border? These are questions we would ask before ever applying for a travel permit because they may indicate a high risk of travel internationally. And lastly, we're in a pandemic. So some countries are not taking international travelers from some other countries. Please check that before you apply for anything and spend your $500 plus. So there are other things to consider besides the cost and the paperwork.
Okay. There's a lot of questions about applicants who are outside of our Tri-County area. And we've, I think, addressed the question in the chat, but maybe just saying it out loud might help too.
Yeah, for applicants outside the Tri-County area, fortunately in the state of California, there are some pretty good networks of resources. The Community Action Board serves clients from throughout California, but primarily from Santa Cruz, Monterey, and San Benito counties. And we would probably offer referrals for those outside of that Tri-County area to other organizations and other attorneys who may be closer to home and can help the applicant review their case.
Can you talk a little bit about Cabrillo students? And I know we mentioned it before, but what the process might be for a Cabrillo student who is interested in help with applying for DACA for the first time?
Absolutely, yeah. So like I mentioned earlier, the landscape changed a lot on December 4th. For the last 3 years before December 4th, DACA initial applications weren't being accepted. And that's because of the Trump administration's efforts to end the program. So since December 4th, organizations like ours have been reallocating resources and doing our best to prepare to process and help young folks with these cases. Beginning in January, we will be starting that in earnest. So any Cabrillo students, faculty, staff should contact our office if they, and let us know that they are affiliated with Cabrillo College, and we will do our best to serve them as soon as possible. We have a wait list, but are offering priority on that to Cabrillo students, staff, and faculty. And lastly, to please bear with us, our phones are ringing off the hook, and actually our reception staff can't always keep up with call volume. So if you're having trouble getting through, it's not because we don't want to take your call. We will do our best to serve you as soon as we can.
We're having a question come up about advanced parole, the travel permit, and whether or not you can apply for that before you're approved for DACA.
We don't generally do that. I have not submitted advanced parole travel permit requests, although at the time of approval for DACA, in theory, one is eligible for the travel permit. Lily, you can talk about whether Skip has had that practice in the past.
We have not, and I haven't done it at any other firm or organization that I've worked for, just because you don't know that your application is going to be approved, and advanced parole is a kind of a secondary benefit to DACA. You have to have DACA first before you're eligible for it. So it's safest to apply for, I think, to apply for DACA, have it be approved, and then apply for advanced parole.
I agree. Yeah, I think it's a very risky thing to send that check without knowing you have the DACA status first.
And I'm in the middle of answering a question, but I think I'll just hand it to you because I think it might be something that others might have come across as well.
Share so that we can see each other a little bit better.
I'm sorry?
Yeah, we can stop the screen share.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. So what if somebody had DACA before and then didn't renew it for one reason or another, and now are hoping to apply again? What happens for that person? Do they need to submit their evidence from the beginning, or is there a way that they can retrieve their file if for some reason they don't have a copy of what they initially submitted?
Yeah, so there are a couple of things there. The first is that after 1 year out of DACA status, so let's say that in our example that you're using, Lily, that someone's DACA expired in December of 2019. Now we're in December 2020. After a year goes by without any longer having your valid DACA grant of DACA and employment authorization, after 1 year, they would have to reapply as an initial application. So that would no longer be a renewal. Renewals don't require much of the evidence that we went over today. Only your first time application requires proving your educational component, requires proving continuous presence. So we do strongly suggest if people are able to renew their DACA before a year has passed, it makes life so much easier. For those who are unable to for whatever reason, they can still apply as a new initial case if it's more than 1 year after expiration. And with respect to the records, I think the easiest way to get records is from, if you had an attorney or other person help you prepare your case, they may have copies, but the government also keeps copies, and you can do a Freedom of Information Act request, also known as a FOIA. And those requests go to the immigration agency, US Citizenship and Immigration Services, and they are able to provide, often on CD form of all things, they send you a CD in the mail, they can provide you your immigration case history. And they don't always have 100% of the records, but they often do. And it takes several months to process that request, but you can sometimes request copies of your old immigration applications directly from the government. And that is free of charge. It's a service required by law. So if you ever are in a case situation where you need to find some of your old records from immigration and you're willing to wait for several months to get them, that's a good option.
Excuse me, can you please repeat the that part? Is it FOYA?
Yes, I'll happily. Yeah, it's called a Freedom of Information Act, or FOIA, FOIA. It's a FOIA
Okay.
request. And the Freedom of Information Act is a law that applies to other federal government agencies, not just to immigration services. But that request would go, and I'll put this in the chat box, to US Citizenship and Immigration Services. And they are the ones who maintain immigration related files.
Okay, because I'm actually the question that she was asking was it was my question, because my brother has, ever since Trump came on, because of the fear, he did not renew. So it's been definitely over a year already. I believe it's 4 years now. So, and I, of course, it had happened that where I had the saved initial application, I don't have it anymore on my laptop. Just died on me, so I don't have that information anymore. But if you're saying I can get the information from Freedom of Information Act, and then they should have that record, so then basically use that and then add the information because he hasn't left the country, so add on to that, right? Like you had mentioned earlier. So just add on evidence.
Yeah,
that
may be one way to reconstruct a case. I think would be to get the Freedom of Information Act requests submitted. It may take several months for those results to come back, and then once you have that, it would document several of those years from 2007 up until the date of application, and then you could supplement that, like you said, with additional records. So sometimes we've got to get creative, and it's a case-by-case determination. I would recommend that any family member in that situation contact a nonprofit organization or private attorney who specializes in this work to help do kind of an individual assessment, because it may be that there are other ideas or other things at play. So those individual screenings are really helpful also.
Great, thank you.
I have a question. So my mom entered, I think, when she was 16, but I'm not sure if she has any documents because I believe she did not start working at that year that she came. She was brought in by her dad, and so I'm just wondering, like, how likely is it that she can qualify for DACA if she does not have, like, if she has gaps where she does not have information that she was here?
Yeah, it's a tough situation, and it's surprisingly common, right? You know, if we think about our lives for however many years we live, sometimes there's years where there's just not a lot of paperwork and not a lot of evidence of what we were doing for whatever reason. And so that's actually, it's not an uncommon situation to be in. Unfortunately, for immigration purposes, they require that every applicant prove their eligibility. And that means if there's no evidence that can be found, from their standpoint, that means she doesn't qualify. So it is very crucial to go through that list, and we have checklists we can provide people if you send us an email, that every single eligibility requirement is met, and not one of them is ignored or undocumented in the application, so that we can avoid a situation where someone submits an application and pays the fee and then doesn't get the benefit of the work permit.
Is there a way that we can access that list? And also, can those documents, like those documents have to be official? Can it be like she was staying at this place, like renting the home or something like that? Like a letter from the, like, the person renting, or like?
I'm glad you brought that up. So letters are very, very rarely considered as credible, reliable evidence to prove physical presence, particularly with entry before 2007. And Lily can feel free to jump in if you have other comments on this one, but I've found that immigration does not find even sworn affidavits, sworn letters, to be credible for that purpose. If there's a small gap, say in 2015, there's 6 months where someone was sick and didn't leave their house and has no records. Maybe for a 6 month or a 3 month gap or something short, maybe 3 months, a letter might help, but not to prove those kind of pillars of eligibility. We have not had success with that generally.
Yeah,
it's usually
the only time I've seen it be kind of, let's say, more successful is in kids, where, let's say, you have attendance records for August through June, but then there's nothing for the summers, right? There's no evidence of the summers. And so, you know, maybe a parent will write a declaration saying they were, you know, in my custody, they never left, I can attest to that. But to, let's say, just like prove big periods of time, just having a letter usually will not be sufficient. They can help with like these small gaps like Matt was mentioning, but it would not be something that you could just like have a few declarations and it would cover a 3 or 4 year period. And I just want to remind people in the chat box and in our questions that we shouldn't be asking questions personally, you know, talking about family members, but we can ask questions hypothetically. So what if somebody did this or that? How could somebody get around this or that? It's just a little safer that way to talk about general questions versus questions about you or your family members or your friends. And Matt, we had another question that's coming up quite a bit about folks who are, let's say, working in the fields or get paid under the table. How could somebody who doesn't have, let's say, a checking account and they don't get pay stubs, what are some ideas that someone like that could use to prove that they have been here all these months and these years?
Yeah, that's a great one. And we work with lots of different clients on this question because not everybody receives pay stubs twice a month. So, you know, like to look at what their life is like and then go from there. So a lot of folks might not have a bank account or pay stubs, but they might have a cell phone. Most people do. So cell phone bills are paid monthly generally, and that's a great way to go back. You know, AT&T and Sprint and T-Mobile and Verizon, they keep your cell phone payment history, and you can request that from those corporations. You know, there are a plethora of other things like rent receipts may work, especially if they show the address, and the more institutionally kind of structured they are, the better. If it's just a receipt scribbled by someone with a, you know, by your landlady, it may be a little harder to use that as evidence. But if you rent from a rental company and they can print you the invoices going back several years, it might be a little stronger. So I would say sometimes rent receipts are effective, like we talked about earlier. And I see Lily put in the chat box, dates and names are crucial. There are other possibilities as well. You know, we think about what people do monthly, right? You might pay utility bills. Did you pay for electricity? Even if the electricity is not in your name, maybe the TV or internet or other monthly payments like car insurance, right? If we all drive, we have car insurance, hopefully. If we don't drive, we don't have a cell phone, sometimes we have to look elsewhere. We get creative, right? So it's not a one size fits all type activity to do this. Every person's going to have different records based on their life during the period of time.
Great. And can I just add that, you know, we've had so many cases through the years. You have to remember that this program it was announced on June 15, 2012. So we've had more than 8 years now with the program. It was halted for a while, but we're still doing renewals. We've seen folks from all kinds of walks of life apply for this program and be approved. And so what Matt said about getting creative is really key here. A lot of people get really hung up, you know, they think, well, I'll never be able to apply because I have this, you know, issue in my life. I would say don't give up hope. Give us a call, give a qualified person a call and see if there are ways for you to move forward. We've had people from, you know, who, let's say you're a stay-at-home mom, right? And all this time, you haven't worked, you haven't gone to school, and you're missing many years of documents. You know, there are ways to still prove that you were here. I mean, maybe you had a gym membership, maybe you had a child or two or more, and that child went to the doctor and they got shots, and they had their weight checked every 2 months or whatever it is. That child had to go to the doctor somehow. It didn't get there on its own. And usually those records will say that the mother came along with the child, or the mother asked questions. So there's always a way, and there's always different creative things that we can think about. So don't get hung up on, oh, I don't have that, or I don't have the other, and don't give up hope. Just give us a call, give another organization a call, and try to problem solve. And we're here to help you with that.
So we didn't officially invite people to unmute, but if people want to ask questions out loud, you are welcome to unmute yourself and ask the question. And probably people are familiar with that, but you just want to press the little button with the microphone and it should unmute you if you'd like to ask a question out loud.
I have a question.
Please.
Yeah, so for today's Texas ruling, does that somehow weigh in on the impact for new applicants? Like if they go ahead and submit a first-time application tomorrow or the day after, will that somehow impact their ability to get accepted?
Yeah, That's a good question. And I think there's a lot of uncertainty around this. So I'll just take 1 minute to talk about it. What happened today was just a court hearing. It was an argument between two sides. The Mexican American Legal Defense Fund is representing several DACA beneficiaries, and the 9 attorney general from Republican attorneys general from several states were arguing that they want to end the DACA program, and they presented their arguments in court. The judge who heard the case is going to take some time to consider the written and oral arguments that were made. A decision could come down on either side. We don't have a crystal ball. I don't predict the future. But either way that he rules, whether it's good news for potential DACA applicants or not, that could then be appealed. So this process is not close to being over. The reason we raise it in these conversations is so that people are aware that it's happening in the background. And to answer your question, it may affect applicants, but we can't say with any certainty. So at this time, we know what the policy is. And the policy at this moment is that people who meet these requirements that we talked about can apply for work permits and from protection from deportation. Next month, who knows what will happen? And I'm sorry I can't give a more definitive answer. That's just the world we're living in right now. And I'll just add, this litigation, it takes a long time, right? We're not talking about having any final decisions next week. There may be things that get blocked and stopped and started and appealed, and that happens over months. So right now we know what the law is, and we're sharing that with you all today.
Matt, if you want to, one more time, because questions continue to come in about the list of requirements, maybe just repost, and some of the questions are in Spanish, maybe repost the Spanish screen with the list of requirements.
Yeah, let me put that back up for everybody. I'll just take a second. While I'm doing this, I want to just return back to something great that Lily said earlier. When we were talking about being creative in documenting your case, sometimes there's ways to get records that even aren't flattering, and people don't really think of these things. But like that speeding ticket you got, that might be good evidence. Or even a juvenile delinquency case where you might have a record showing that you were a minor who did something not so great when you were 15. That might be helpful. So, you know, continuing to think critically about what records might be out there, even if it's something like a divorce or a speeding ticket that you don't want to really share with the world, but isn't too harmful, right? Those may end up helping you to show where you were at that time. So on the screen here, we have reposted the Spanish language requirements.
And just a reminder that in order to be eligible for DACA, you have to meet all these requirements. Were there other questions? Anyone else who wants to unmute themselves? Did something just come in over the chat, Lily? Maybe not.
Yeah, there's a flurry of questions coming in, but a lot of them are being sent privately. So you see me just like typing furiously. So one of the questions that's being asked is kind of just more clarification about the case that occurred today and what might be the possibility if, let's say, the opposing side wins. So let's say the judge says that that DACA is unconstitutional. What happens then?
Yeah, I'm a little bit hesitant to speculate, but I'll try to do my best to answer that. This judge who's hearing the case, Andrew Hanen, is known as being one of the more conservative federal judges in the country. That's not good for potential DACA applicants. However, he's recognized, I can't remember the exact metaphor he used, but he said something along the lines of, you know, the cat's out of the bag. Once people have already applied for DACA, they already have the benefit. And he's shown some hesitation to strike down the entire policy, affecting more than 700,000 youth. all at once. So we don't know what'll happen, but no matter what he decides, it's likely that the other side of the case, the losing side, will appeal the decision. In federal litigation, oftentimes appeals courts make decisions about what the law should be while they continue to hear appeals going up. Since DACA exists now and DACA initial applications are permitted now, there is a likelihood that any changes to the law would not happen, they'd be paused until there's a final decision in the case. Now, we can't say that with any certainty, but I would guess it's more likely than not that the result of that litigation, whatever it is, while it's pending appeal, that DACA continues. And Lily, if you have other thoughts about that, you can share them. I think that the bottom line is that we don't know, but to consider that there's finality just because you see a headline in 2 weeks that this judge made a decision. That doesn't mean it's the end of the road. And just to keep going back and informing yourself when there's developments.
Yeah, I would continue on what you have said and highlight also that DACA has been like a ping pong ball this year, right? 1 second it's this, 1 second it's the other. And it has been enough to cause some significant whiplash, even in us experts that deal with DACA every day. So it's really important just to be informed and be on top of the news and what's going on with DACA. As of today, as of right now, DACA exists and initial applications can move forward. What will happen in 2 weeks or 2 days, really, like Matt said, would require a crystal ball to be able to say, definitively what will happen. I think that we have some really good things happening in that, USCIS immigration has put out for the first time tips and rules on how to proceed, whereas previously that had not happened. And so I feel that enough has happened. The Supreme Court decision, all the cases that have come after that, the Wolf memo getting taken down, and now USCIS putting forward instructions on how people can apply. As Matt said, as Judge Hainan said, I think it would be really hard to go back now. And I think also that any person who applied now, even if DACA is no longer in 2 weeks or a month, if you applied while the program was open and while people were eligible, your application should be honored. Now, will it be retroactive? Will something happen in the future? Again, we cannot answer these questions, but it gives me hope that we've come this far and that we've had so many positive things happen in the last couple of weeks.
Other questions from the group? You're all asking very thoughtful questions in the chat and online here. Let's see.
Looks like one of the last questions that has come in is, so what happens if, let's say a person came in after, or before they turned 16, but they don't have any proof of it, and all their evidence begins after they turn 16?
I think this is one of the most difficult scenarios we see with DACA. And it's like I said earlier, you need proof. That's the short answer. You need to prove you were here before you were 16, before June 15th, 2007. If you can't prove it, immigration almost certainly will not approve a case for DACA. So it's one of the greatest challenges. And I do suggest if someone's in that situation where they're this close, they're just missing that 1 month or one record because they haven't been able to figure out how to find evidence, that's a good time to work with an expert on your case. So it's get in contact with one of the nonprofit organizations on the referral list, or if the wait's too long and you want to move forward, there's also private attorneys. They may have more capacity to move more quickly. although they do charge often substantial fees for their service, to consider one of those options.
Well, it looks like the questions are winding down. Unless there's anything else anyone would like to unmute themselves and ask or put in the chat. And I guess maybe just to talk a little bit, I know you kind of did, Matt, but just about the process. So right now we have, what, 200, 250 people maybe on a waiting list, which sounds like a lot. It is a lot. But what we're working on doing right now, we're going to continue to do events like this. We want to share the information with as many people as possible so that first you can decide, are you eligible? If you look at all the requirements, and I know a lot of people are putting questions in the chat, I was born this date, am I eligible? We're asking you to do a little bit of homework, look at the list. You have to be born before what date, Matt?
The date in 1981, let's see, is
Sorry, I didn't mean to put you on the spot. I thought you were just gonna pull it out of the air.
Yeah, lots of dates today.
Yeah, most definitely.
Yeah, June 15th, 1981, right.
Yeah, so it's a pretty straightforward question. Were you born before that date or if you're born after that date? So sorry, you have to be born after that date. If you were born before that date, you're not eligible. If you were born after that date, you are eligible. So look at the list and just go through the questions and ask yourself, point number 1, do I qualify? Point number 2, do I qualify? And you go through those 7, 8 requirements. You have to say yes to every single question. If you say no to any of the questions, unfortunately right now you do not qualify. If you don't have a high school diploma, you can enroll in a class, and it has to be a high school diploma course, right, Matt, or a GED course? It can't be ESL or other kinds of classes.
Yes, thank you for raising that, Kate. Yeah, exactly. It has to be a course to moving either towards a diploma or towards a GED. So if you're enrolled in that, summer graphic design program, but you dropped out of high school and weren't able to finish for whatever reason, that is not considered enrollment for purposes of DACA. You need to be enrolled to get your diploma, your GED, or there's always the military exception, which comes up very rarely. But occasionally someone is honorably discharged from the military and they will accept that as well.
Yeah, so that's your first step. Look at that list of requirements. We will email that out to you. We've posted it a few times in the chat. If you send an email to daca@cabinc.org, you'll get an automatic response that will also show you that list of requirements. And do a screening of yourself. If you do that screening and you believe you are eligible, the next step in that same document is the list of all the evidence you need to gather. Now, we would recommend email us or call us to get on a wait list. And if you're already on our wait list, then go ahead and start doing that work of collecting all those documents. And once you've got, well, we're going to call you as soon as we get to your name on the list. But the best case scenario, as soon as we get to your name on the list, we call you up and you say, hey, I have everything. And we're having people right now during the pandemic submit their documents over email. So we'll have you photograph or scan your documents, email them into us. Don't do that now, but after we call you, just so you know kind of what to expect. And then if you have all your documents, you can cover at least every 3 months for the last 13 years, prove that you were in the country and prove all the other requirements. Then we'll go ahead and work with you to fill out the forms. So that's the process right now. So step 1, I would say step 1, screen yourself. Step 2, get on the wait list, right, Matt? And then just start collecting your documents and wait for our call. And there will be a wait. If you're just getting on the wait list now, it's probably, what are we thinking, 2 or even 3 months right now of a wait?
Yeah, and it's difficult to estimate, right, Kate? So we are ramping up our staffing for this, so we can serve as many people as quickly as possible. And we will screen you, before opening any case with the Community Action Board's immigration project. But the self-screening and the document preparation and having you be ready when your name comes up will enable us to work together to serve you. So yeah, it's difficult to give an exact date. I think we'll just make our way through that list as fast as we can and try to serve as many members of our community as possible.
Definitely, but just to kind of prepare people for the fact that we won't be calling you next week. We probably won't be calling you in 2 weeks. But we will call you, and you're welcome to email us or call us to verify that you're still on the wait list. Don't do that every week, please, but you can do that every 3 weeks or so. And that's kind of a little bit more about what to expect.
Hey, Matt, can I ask one last question here?
Yeah, please.
We had a really great question come into the chat, and I just want to make sure that we address it to everyone. So there's a question about the information that people submit to immigration to apply for DACA, and what happens to that information if, let's say, in the future, DACA is done away with. Are there things that people should worry about? Are there no concerns? Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yes, I can. And Lily, I may ask you to help me if you have input as well. There have been conversations since before 2012, since before this program was announced by the Obama administration, about what would some sort of relief for this group of younger people who entered when they were children without status, what would it look like if they're turning over information to immigration? And historically, ICE had, I don't know if this was enforceable, but had agreed not to act on this information that's submitted for purposes of US Citizenship and Immigration Services granting a work permit. And just to give a quick explainer on this, the Department of Homeland Security is a big federal agency and has lots of parts. And whenever you go to the airport, you see the Transportation Security Administration, the TSA, that's part of the Department of Homeland Security. When you go to the border, you see the Customs and Border Protection. It's part of this big government bureaucracy. But ICE is separate from US Citizenship and Immigration Services. They're both under the same umbrella of the same government agency, but they're actually separate sub-agencies, and they operate somewhat independently. So there have been concerns about, can information in one branch of DHS be acted on by ICE and used as an enforcement tool in the future? And there are very real concerns. And what I would say is that we have not historically seen ICE acting on DACA related information. But if you have other undocumented members in your household who are concerned about giving addresses and things like that, it's a good time to consult individually with an immigration attorney or other accredited representative to talk about what the potential impacts could be in the future, right? And Lily, if you have anything to add about that, feel free.
Yeah, the only thing that I would add is that historically, we were really able to rely on the statements that would be put out by USCIS. So if they said something like, we're not going to share this information with the Department of Homeland Security, we could rely on that, we could trust that. Or not the Department of Homeland Security, but let's say USCIS was not going to share that information with ICE. And unfortunately, during the Trump administration, we have seen USCIS kind of backtrack on certain things because the head person, right, the head administration kind of trickles down and they want information. And so there has been heightened concern, let's say, but I'm comforted by the fact that there's always been pushback. And from the creation of DACA, this was a tool to protect youth, right? To make sure that there is protection from deportation and a way to live and breathe in a safe and secure way here in the United States. And so there was a kind of a policy that this information would not be shared, that these applicants would be protected. And so, as Matt said, we haven't seen USCIS go back on their word about that. And I think that we can rely on that. But I say all that backstory to kind of let you know that things have changed since DACA started under the Obama administration. Now we're under the Trump administration. We're going to be heading into a Biden administration. And I think that we're going to be heading into an administration that is much more favorable to immigrants, much kinder than what we have seen in the last 4 years. And so, though I think that we can always say that there might be a certain level of risk, I think the risk is going to start going down. I think that we're going to be okay, but we can't just blanket say like, you're going to be fine and the information is not going to be shared. We can't make those kinds of statements. We can't, say that those protections are absolute, but I think that it's going to start getting better, and we haven't seen it be an issue before. Now, I think that if you have certain criminal issues in your past, and I think that if you have, let's say, some kind of gang affiliations or something like that in the past and your case is denied, then that information can and might be shared with ICE. And so, as always, it's a great idea to make sure that you are screened by an attorney or a qualified rep to make sure that you are protecting yourself as much as you possibly can in your application.
Well, thank you so much, everybody, for joining us this evening. I think we're going to wrap up here, but thank you so much for all your questions, all of your just interaction, and we will continue to do these webinars in January. We'll be sending invitations to anybody who is on our wait list, and we will do our best as well to send to everybody who was with us here tonight. We will do that as well, and we will just continue forward. And again, we have our own wait list. We have these legal service providers that are shared on the screen, and so we're confident that everybody who wants to apply for DACA this year will get the assistance that they need. So reach out to us or reach out to one of our partners. And thank you so much, Matt and Lily and Isai, who's supporting us there behind the scenes. I don't know if anyone wants to say any last words before we wrap up for the night.
No, just thank you everyone for joining us, and we'll continue these conversations if we get new information to share.
Great, and thank you to Matt. Yes, and thanks to Beatriz that's doing our interpretation.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody. Beatriz, you're back with us. Thank you so much. Oh, I guess you're still in Spanish. Hold on, let me see if I can, oh, now I can hear you in Spanish. Yeah. Oh, thank you. What would we do without you? I'll stop recording.